Hello, everyone. Welcome to It's a Wednesday. I'm pretty sure it's a Wednesday. All the evidence in the universe is going to convince me that it is, in fact, a Wednesday. And on Wednesdays, what do we do on the Intergames YouTube channel? Well, we do these discipline deep dives. It's a pretty regular thing that we've got going on here, so we're not going to stop now. Except a slight asterisk to that, I suppose, because it's the last one of the year. Most of the team are going on hollybobs as of next week, including me. And that just means that there's no one here to plan and host and click the buttons. And so if you're here with us live, watching on the YouTube or watching on the LinkedIn, a kind of final but definitely glorious hello to you today. It is the 11th of December. I'm Jonas, the Community and Events Lead over at Into Games. I imagine many of you watching will be quite familiar with Into Games and what we do, but just in case you're not, Into Games is a UK-based charity looking to improve social mobility in the UK games industry. We recognise that if you come from a low-income or under-resourced background, there are just so many more barriers in place that don't really let you enjoy a career in this creative industry, especially when compared to other creative industries around it. And so we try and improve that pathway. We try and improve your likelihood of getting into the games industry in a number of different ways. We do courses called sprint courses. We do these free events here on the YouTube. And we just also do a huge amount of creating resources and providing sort of community. You can join the Discord. There's all these links down in the YouTube. I keep kind of gesturing my hands like a sort of a Pixar villain, but I do mean to be pointing at the YouTube description down below. So if you're not familiar with anything that we do, click on a link down there. You should get taken to a link tree. There's a Discord server, and there's all sorts. Get involved. So I mentioned that we do these kind of free events, and today is one such event. We call these discipline deep dives because we pick a particular subject in the games industry. Might be animation, programming, production. Today we're going to be talking about audio, and specifically we're going to be talking to not one, not five, but two professionals who work in the UK games industry as audio people. I'm going to let them sort of describe what it is they do. So if you don't mind, please give a warm digital applause to our two guests. We have a Ryan Sim and we have a Thomas Hansen. Hello to you both, Ryan and Thomas. Are you both well? Just some vibe checks here. Is everything going all right?
It's going grand, yeah.
Just feel yourself.
I just want to double check, yeah.
Still got my torso. Yes, it's going all right. It's going all right. Fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining me. So just a little bit of a hint. It's in the title, everyone. But we're going to be talking about sort of genres in games, and sort of how to utilize all audio in tandem with genre to really uplift and enhance video games. But before we kind of get into that subject, let's just understand a little bit about who am I talking to. So I'm going to start with my immediate left. I hope I look the right way. I hope I look the right way. Yeah. Ryan Sim, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please? Your relationship to games and audio, etc.
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. My name's Ryan, as was nicely introduced. Currently just joined as an audio director at AAll, working on an MMO under the same name. Before that, I was at Wabi Sabi Sound as an audio director. They've made everything from Ori and the Blind Forest and all those big fun games that everyone seems to love. I've been in the games industry for about 12 years now, so I've been very lucky. Got to work on titles such as Diablo's latest expansion, Vessel of Hatred, um, Prison Architect, Until Dawn, Destruction All Stars, Hitman, even games I grew up playing like RuneScape, I somehow got to work on as well, which has been really amazing. But yeah, that's kind of my overall summary. I've started as an intern and climbed all my way up to director, so it's been very great. Over to you, Thomas.
Ooh, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Thomas. I'm a composer, and I've been working in games for near about 8 years, maybe approaching about 9 years. And I've worked on a whole bunch of things. I've worked on Dark Picture series for Supermassive Games. I designed all their music systems for that. I also do music for short films. I'm also on a bunch of other projects that I'm not allowed to talk about right now, but it would have been super cool if I could have been able to talk about them. But I can't at the moment. Um, Basically, for me, I kind of feel like composers, certainly of our generation, probably should be really good music system designers as well. And to be honest, you're the most qualified people to do it. Like composers just turn out to be the best music system designers, and it's a great way to get on other projects that you might not necessarily have written the music for. And also, it's fun. And I said a bunch of stuff I can't talk about right now, but we cool if I could.
No worries. Well, whatever those things are, I hope they're supremely fun and exciting for you, as I'm sure they're going to be for us when we learn about them. I get this hint. I got this feeling that it's like, oh, if we just done this talk, like if we just push this talk a couple of days or a couple
Yeah,
of,
maybe.
it's not like there's a massive surge of events and award ceremonies and things like that, where I'm sure we're going to hear lots of new things. But whatever it is, that's very exciting, and I look forward to you being able to talk about it in the near
Thank you.
future, whatever it is. Well, what we'll do then is let's talk a little bit about sort of the subject first, right? So before we kind of get into specific genres or specific games and projects, let's talk a little bit about what audio just kind of is in games. You know what I mean? Like, I think from a layman's kind of point of view, if you were trying to explain this to your granddad and whatnot at home, you might be able to say that audio is definitely, it's the music that plays during a moment, maybe two moments, maybe there's three whole musics in a video game, who knows. And definitely some voice, some talking might happen in a video game, and it might be nice to hear those characters talk. And there's definitely some sound effects, like when gun, do the left click. Also, please make the gun blasty noise, something like that, right? But it'd be really lovely to kind of, from your perspective, or just from sort of from the perspective of people who aren't putting it into such layman's terms like Jonas is. What is audio to you, and for you, kind of what do you think it does for games? How does it bring games to that next level? I'm gonna go Ryan, then Thomas, just because it's easy.
Sure. I mean, we're all going to be biased because we're in audio, but to me, I think audio is at least 50% of an experience of a game. It's, one of the main things that you like. You see a game and you hear the game. It's the biggest way to convey either player emotion or just give the player a really great experience to immerse you in a world, as the topic of this talk is about anyway. It can help you set a scene. Are you in a spooky corridor? Are you in a giant fantasy land? The ambience, the music can all work together to sell you that. It's also the biggest kind of communicator alongside visuals of what is actually happening to a player. If you're getting shot at in a FPS game, you get hit, you normally expect to hear a sound because that's letting you know as feedback that you are getting hit. And a lot of this kind of contextual audio is what really makes an audio experience actually sell. If someone is doing voiceover for a project and it sounds like it was recorded in a bathroom and doesn't sound very good, you're immediately out of the immersiveness. So having that kind of entire cohesive experience in one thing is what makes audio really great.
Thank you, Ryan. I think for me, I mean, as a species, we're obsessive storytellers, and I think games is just another manifestation of this one thing that we've been doing since forever. For me, I think the best sort of sound design and the best music, or the best any audio discipline, whatever asset it is, if it tells a story, I think that's just what people find so compelling and what makes the world feel real. I kind of actually, one example I always tend to go back in is the gun sounds in Doom in 2016. Is you see the gun sounds in Doom are so like amazingly over the top and cool. But even like the one sound that like a shotgun does or like the Gauss gun does, it's just so complicated and cool. But that one sound sort of tells a story about what you're doing, and it sort of tells a story about how the character is feeling. Like the character Doom guy doesn't actually say anything in the entire game, but the sounds that really do communicate what this person's really all about and what they're thinking. And he doesn't say a word. Yeah, the character feels incredibly deep. So for me, I feel like, as I said, we're just obsessive storytellers, and the audio is. Maybe I'm biased too, but I'm going to say 50%. I'm just going to say 50% too, and but then again, all the baggage that I come with that, I think it's about that much and how important it is. Because even when you look at other projects that intentionally avoid doing certain things, and you see like the film No Country for Old Men, like there's no music in that film, there's none, and you feel its absence, and that's done on purpose. So even an absence of it, I think, is a super strong tool because we can't help but notice that. So when we actually do have the music, it feels just as powerful, even with its absence. So yeah, as I said before, we're obsessive storytellers, and video games is just another avenue in which we can't help ourselves.
I do like that you both. I think you both held yourself back when you were like 50%. I was expecting over like it is 99.9% of the video game. I'll have you know, Jonas. Yeah, but I think like I completely agree with it. There's this real sense of when I kind of check myself to be like, do I agree with that? I instantly I sort of feel myself like, imagine you were watching a game over someone's shoulder, and it was muted, and just that sense of detachment you get from the visuals where it's like, oh, all the information's missing. Like I don't know, I don't have a good sense, I don't have a strong sense of what the emotion is right now, what the context is. Like, are you in a fight, are you running from something, are you stealthing? Like music and sound tends to inform so much of like what the player is kind of like feeling mechanically or like interacting with mechanically, and it's just really beautiful to kind of explore that. Thank you very much for sort of expanding on that. So I guess really what I want to do now is I want to just kind of let you two chat because this is your field. You two are the experts, and it's just, I think it's so much more interesting to hear what you sort of have to say about this. So really, I just kind of want to throw this topic out there, which is like, sound is not the same for different genres of games necessarily. If you played me the soundtrack of like an action adventure game, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, for example, has one of the most just iconic albums of all time. But then you play to me the literal album and soundtrack of like Alien Isolation, I would, with 100% accuracy, be able to differentiate the two soundtracks song by song, just because their vibes are going to be very different. So I'd just love to talk about genre, and it doesn't just have to be music, it's sound design, it's voices, it might even be how characters are voiced differently or deliver their voices differently. But you two have quite a breadth of experience working on different projects and different games. So I'm basically just going to sort of throw this topic out there to say, can we just talk a little bit about genres, different genres, how it uplifts games? And I'm going to let you two just go for it.
Sure. I mean, might as well start off with horror because that's the Dark Pictures anthology was mentioned, and Thomas also covered one of the most kind of typically common audio things that we do with sound in horror is reduce it or remove it. So we mentioned the audio is a big part of selling the experience, the lack of audio or the lack of music. does the opposite. It's something that we've taken from film as well. So we do this with film soundtracks. When you're watching a horror film and you know there's gonna be a jump scare because the music, the violins are starting to play, then they go quiet, and then there's just the silence or the noise of a room tone, the kind of general ambience of an area, and it leaves space for any sound, no matter how quiet, to sound very impactful. And that's something that we do try and imitate within game audio as well. I'm sure you'd be able to cover it of approaches you'd take with music for that, of just reduction of different instrumentation or building that suspense just to take everything away and leave a viewer uncomfortable. A lot of sound is, as I mentioned, that immersion. So it's a really kind of fun way to play with that, and it's something we don't tend to do within other genres as much, at least from my experience.
Oh yeah, there are some howlingly unmusical things you can get away with in horror, and not just in like instrumentation, because we have all this like what's normally referred to as aleatoric, but aleatoric just means random. It doesn't necessarily mean an orchestra of people smashing their instruments against each other, but a lot of the time it's also aharmonic, so it doesn't actually have a key or anything like that at all. A lot of the time when you think about genre, especially in music, horror is a bit of a unique case because when you're doing like music implementation and stuff, normally you're thinking with a high sense of musicality, like, oh, I need this piece of like this chord progression to play out correctly, and I need it to transition this way in order for this to harmonically make sense. And I need to do like an on the bar transition or on the beat transition just so it all sounds like it's in the same tempo and stuff like that. In horror, you don't need to do any of that. There are so many sort of like opportunities that can pop up that mean you can do an immediate transition to something because you're sort of intentionally trying to like throw the player off and make them feel a bit uncomfortable. So horror brings up all these amazing opportunities to do what would normally be, again, howlingly unmusical things, because there's usually two tempos in horror. I'm interested in your opinion on this, Ryan. There's usually two tempos. As long as you're following one of them, it's fine. You have your musical tempo, but you also have the tempo of the narrative. And as long as you're following one of those, it kind of really doesn't matter. It will suit. Like you bring the music down and you're just left with like a harmonic string just playing up top, just to leave all this space, and then all of a sudden like the sound design of like a creaking floorboard gets jacked all the way up and it sounds really loud. And in a sense, that's really good like sound design leading that moment. And then all of a sudden like a scare like will happen, and you can just do that like immediately if you really want to. I've often found that I use the word stings. I'm not meaning that in like in a technical sense. I just kind of mean stings as in like it happens really quickly, and that's that. I've often found in horror, if the sound is diegetic, i.e., the characters are aware of the sound and can hear it, I've often found those scares are actually a lot more effective. Like say like you're going down a corridor and an alien like jumps out and it's a scream of an alien very sharp and very suddenly. I've often found you have to sort of look at a scene and think, what is actually going to lead to this moment? What's actually the scariest? I've often found that if I need to like put the sound of like someone taking like a hammer to the soundboard of a piano, the scene might not necessarily be working as well as it should be if it's a non-diegetic sound, i.e. a sound that the characters aren't aware of. But if it is a diegetic sound, like an alien scream or like a door bursting open very loudly, I often find that those are way more effective. But that's not necessarily always the case. Just horror specifically has these sort of considerations that you need to have a very happy marriage between every single audio discipline, and someone needs to make space for someone. And most of the time, I'm usually in a review, and I'll say like, you know what, I just don't think the music is the thing to lead this one particular thing. But you see, if it's like one character like letting go of another one as they fall to their doom, actually maybe the music can lead that moment. But if it's like the killer slamming open the door, then immediately axing like your friend, then it's like, okay, well, I'm probably going to let the sound design do that one. I think that's the most effective way to do that. But it's all about having a happy marriage between all these different audio disciplines and just being willing to sort of say, from a compositional point of view, that I can't lead that. How about you go ahead and do something really cool for that instead?
So you've both spoken a little bit about horror there. are there you've definitely both worked on a couple of other projects. You mentioned some of the different things that like Wabi Sabi Sound has worked on and just a bit of a portfolio. Is there any difference then, or do you want to compare what you've kind of just said to maybe something that's a little bit more like uplifting or a little bit more fanciful, maybe sort of a indie puzzle game, or something that's like more kind of bright and family friendly?
Oof. There's a fair few, I guess. I mean, I can talk about experience with a very old project, which was Disney Infinity. So obviously, it's very PG, very family. It was that game where everyone would collect these little statues and put them on, and then you could play as all the characters. So that was a really sort of fun game where everything you are considering is essentially magical to an extent. Like everything appears with sparkles, and it becomes a interesting challenge when you do anything that sounds sort of fantasy or magical to try and keep it grounded within the world as well. So, if you have just a sparkle, like the typical jingles you imagine as something pops up, normally like little hi-hats or twinkly bells, that's okay, but it doesn't really sell much of the experience or make it feel like it's effectively like real life. Even though it's in a game, you want it to feel like that sound makes sense within the context. So you would find layering other organic sounds underneath it. We call organic sounds just something that's from the real world as well, like the sound of a bag of flour dropping to get like a poof sound as well. That immediately adds a lot more grounding to a sound. And when you layer it with a sparkle, you've immediately got a sound that fits the purpose and it fits the context, but it also sounds a bit more believable, even though it's a sound that doesn't exist in the real world at all. And I think that's a really fun part of fantasy, is trying to make something feel like it fits within reality, even though it's something that might not exist at all. It's the same approach I'd also take with sort of sci-fi weapons. A project I've been directing is with Wabi Sabi Sound. It's all futuristic lasers, but the kind of approach I took was I called it low sci-fi, which is you get your pew-pews, but all of the sounds start from real-world weapons or real-world guns, so you still got that believable feeling to it, even if you're sort of embellishing it with the more sci-fi Star Wars lasers that you would expect from the fantasy. Because if it was just the lasers, it just wouldn't feel very enjoyable for the player. You wouldn't really get as immersed. It just sort of sounds just a bit too high-pitched and whiny after a little bit. But yeah, what about your experience, Thomas?
Well, when it was said like happy and family friendly, I had to go and double check my credits and go, nope, 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 nope. I did do some music for a game. Unfortunately, it didn't come out, but that was mostly guitar music. It was very sort of Scott Pilgrim versus the World. The style of music was really fun. The game would have had like different battle of the bands, and I did a rock piece for every single one. And I used to tour in a metal band when I was younger, so it was a bit like returning to a previous life, in a way. The sound design for that was definitely, even though I didn't do it, but this is one of the reasons why I really like working in games, is you talk an awful lot to all the other audio disciplines around you, and you try and figure it out. You're sort of in the trenches together all the way through it. What I didn't like about, well, now I'm not sure about how I feel about working in film, is by the time a director gets to you, they're kind of like a shadow of their former selves, and you're sort of slightly playing therapist as well as composer, and it's this house of cards they built up, and they sometimes are understandably a bit cautious about doing things, or they go the total other way and have stopped caring at all and are willing for you to do whatever you feel like. But it doesn't tend to be sort of like anything in the middle. I said, well, the first game I actually ever worked on was Far Cry Primal, when I used to be an assistant to a different composer, and I'm going to put that in the not family friendly category. So my experience of games are a bit more light-hearted. Is just by sheer quirk of fate, this is certainly not something I've manufactured. Has been a bit limited.
But Far Cry as a brand, right, has kind of twisted itself into something that's a little slapstick, a little absurdist,
Yeah, I think so.
still like quite full on action. I think full on and absurdist maybe being the kind of words I wanted to look at there. How has that transition been? Because if you're starting at Far Cry Primal, which I imagine, there might be some elements of horror, like the
Oh yeah.
woolly mammoth stands upon you and you are just a man with a stick.
Oh yeah.
But I still imagine that there's some elements there that absolutely don't translate into full on horror, full on devil in me sort of territory.
Oh yeah. There was a slight sense of discovery and adventure. But I'm not saying it slips into like Indiana Jones, like it's just but there is something about that is a bit more rustic, a bit less obvious horror, and a bit more a slight sense of wonder at exploring a strange world. There is that, even that it's still all like really rustic. Like there's like nothing made of metal in the score. It's almost all bones and woods and things like that. But it was Jason Graves, and I was his assistant a long, long, long time ago. But that was my break into the business. It's a bit old fashioned, but that was my break into it. And by the way, I don't recommend your first game being a AAA game as your first in the business. I would recommend starting with smaller projects, even though that was fun and everything. And like I'm 36, I think now, and that was in like my mid-20s. I think that's probably the time where you probably could survive doing that kind of thing. But even now, I'm a bit like, oh, that was ever so stressful.
Hindsight's 2020.
But you don't really know what you're getting into until it's over, to some extent, especially at the start of your career.
Yeah, you find a lot of different with small projects versus large projects. I guess we haven't really covered this, so it might be nice to talk about it a little. But I've been lucky enough to work on AAA things just throughout my career. Ubisoft was a fun year and a bit of just pure leading a team across multiple different areas and projects, which was fun. I've also been on the indie side, and there is a very big difference for people maybe looking to get into it. I think from a sound perspective, in general, if you're looking to get into the industry or you're earlier on in your career, AAA is a really great way. If you can get into a studio, there's internships and junior roles that are a lot more common in AAA industry versus indie studios. But that you have a lot more of a safety net with AAA, I find, in that you have a larger team. You'll have someone looking over you as well. So when I was a lead, I looked over every member of the team. So you're there to support people. Whereas in sort of indie games, the team tends to be a lot smaller. You'll cover a lot more subjects, which is great if you're that type of learner. But you tend to be on your own a lot more, which can be either a challenge if that's not how you thrive. There might be things that you've not been able to learn because you haven't worked on a game that does that yet, so you're making it up. That's part of the fun, but it's also extremely daunting if you're just trying to get your feet into the industry and the first thing you're trying to do is something you've never done before. So I do find that there's that approach, and with AAA, you tend to be a lot more focused on a specific area. So I had a lot of my team on maybe just weapons, so that'd be someone's role. I'm sure for you, Thomas, it would have been, would you have worked on single like areas of a soundtrack or like overall songs, or did you cover a really broad range with the AAA side of things?
Oh, well, a lot of my sort of music system design work, which, by the way, I thoroughly recommend every composer learn how to use at least one audio middleware program. And I'm not sure if this is just my experience, but every contract I have ever had has been with Audio Kinetics Wise. I've not actually had a contract with Fmod yet. And I don't think that's because there's anything wrong with or right with either one. I'm not really making a judgment either way. But I think learning at least one is pretty much mandatory, because the one thing that I tell a lot of other composers who are trying to get into games is, sort of, truth is, there's way too many of us. There's way too many composers. There are, and one of the ways that you can seriously differentiate yourself is knowing how to do really good music system design. Like, go to the Audio Kinetic website and look at the courses on how to implement music. And see, just because of your training as a composer, you're going to be way better at it than anybody else. Like seriously, you'll be fantastic at it. Because I've noticed, like, composers tend to think of very musical solutions to musical problems. And in game development, that saves a heck of a lot of time. And if you're saving time, you're saving money. And if you're making the product better, well, you're going to get better scores in the end. And you're probably going to be asked to come back and do it all over again, which is what will happen to me, because I'm originally from Glasgow in Scotland. And I moved down to the southeast of England on a 3-month contract. That was like 8 years ago, and I'm still here. It's just it's funny how life sort of like turns out that way. So the one thing is, if you can make sort of your, I don't want to use the word side gigs. I think that has a lot of baggage to it. But see if you can add another string to your bow, which is you're able to provide, say, hey, well, there's a big difference between these two things. Going to like GDC or develop and you're like networking and stuff like this. If you go up to a prospective client and say, hey, my name's Thomas, I'm a composer, here's my card. The second thing is, hey, my name's Thomas, I'm a composer, and I can take care of the whole pipeline for you. The second one got me a heck of a lot more attention, like a lot more attention, because maybe Ryan can like confirm or deny this for me. I'd be interested. Is some audio director friends I've talked to, they've said, Thomas, you doing that means I don't have to ask one of my sound designers to go and do that, when frankly they've got things that they're better trained at to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think having someone music, like, I'd say the role is called a music designer.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's something that's becoming more popular now, and I've only really seen it starting to become a role the past 3-ish years.
Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah.
And I think it is a role that a lot of studios are gonna start getting into. So, the more you're able to do just skill set wise, the more valuable you'll be, no matter what. If you go to an indie developer, they can't afford to hire lots of people. So if you can do everything, it's the same for sound design. So if you can make the sound effects, that's amazing, but you won't get very far unless you know at least the basics of putting your sound in a game. If you can make your sound play and have an understanding of, this is an ambience because I'm making a fantasy game and I want to sell that I'm in the woods. This should be a sound that plays 2D within your ears with some spot effects within it. This is cool. It also helps you kind of know when you're designing how you want to approach it, when you have an understanding of the technical systems. You can learn. There's a lot of really great game audio resources that can teach you all of this as well. Free tutorials online. Unreal Engine has a lot. WWise also does a lot of courses that you can fully enroll in for free, and they are really great just to have as a reference. But yeah, the more you can more skill set that you have, the more you can present yourself, the more higher you'll be, and you'll find it will just kind of project your career and help you stand out a lot. You'll be surprised at how many people don't have that experience. Even just self-taught is infinitely valuable as long as you can prove it. Like if you're looking at doing a show reel or anything, try and include something technical in it. If you're a composer, here is my music. Here is my music in WWise. Just doesn't have to be in a game. Just here is how it might work if I put it in a game to showcase I know this. It kind of breaks that barrier of needing a ship project to be able to get experience. You can make your own. And I find that really great because it's free. It's a free resource that kind of cuts down the accessibility sort of requirements needed to get your foot in the door nowadays. It is a really great time just for audio, I think.
I have noticed a lot of sound designers doing this, and I thought this was a great idea. A lot of ones who were trying to get into the business, is they would do like resounds, as in like they took like, I don't get to see like sound designer CVs terribly often because I got no business seeing that. I guess it's but I have seen some really good reels, and it's mostly been from people who have like taken like clips of their favorite games and then just stripped everything out and done it all themselves. And I've seen some sound design reels that are insanely good from people who have never shipped a game.
Yeah, you can build up loads of really just great experience and skill sets. It's how I got started, was just redoing sounds and doing sounds to linear animations, so non-game audio. It sort of builds up that general design skill set or composition skill sets, and then you can start applying it into the game side of things. As I mentioned, there's a lot of games you can now just reskin with your own audio. Wise used to have a Limbo project that people would
Oh
just
yes,
place
they
their own
did.
sounds in, and that was just a really simple of, I've changed this footstep and now this is my own footstep. This is really cool. And when you're first getting started, it's just really wholesome. It's really fun, and if you enjoy that, you can go further into that and start looking at the more complex things, because it's games, you know. So I've got a footstep sound. How can I change the footstep sound depending on the surface I'm walking on? Because games are all about interaction, and selling that experience. So if you're stepping on snow and you're hearing a stone footstep, eventually that'll confuse you or annoy you or take you out of the immersion. So it is one of these kind of, it's a career that you'll forever be learning in. I'm still learning. I try to hire people better than me where I can because I want to learn from them still as well. And I think that's something you should always look to try and do.
You've reminded me like a few different examples of like footsteps really mattering to me in video games and things like that. But you've just reminded me, like, it's came out earlier this year, Astrobot just had this really wonderful sound design, because it's like if you were walking on sand or grass or glass or metal, not only was the sound design different, but actually the haptic feedback in your controller was different. And it's like that level of immersion, that level of, I know I'm walking on something different because I can feel it and I can hear it and I can see it, like really talking to all the senses. And in chat, Sir Shinra's just mentioned like this idea of making audio, making music for projects that don't actually exist. You reminded me that there are concept albums out there, right? There's an artist called Leon who's made an album called Bird World and Bird World 2. And these are these two albums for these video games that don't exist. But you listen to it and you can imagine the platformer, the 2D platformer that you're never going to play, called Bird World, because this music kind of immerses you into this world that doesn't exist. And you mentioned it as well, like, people's portfolios now, or people when they're sort of pre-games, are building their portfolios by redesigning entire moments in video games and scenes with their own sounds. And I've just seen someone doing this with Dead Space, and it's fascinating because they are redesigning the fleshy and quite gruesome transformation of a monster. But it's all their own work. It's their own Foley, it's their own sound design, it's everything being remade. And I'm watching this and I am not seeing the quality difference between what I know to be the AAA video game Dead Space and what I know is this person's original sound. I don't feel that difference. And I think if you can do that right, if you can show me one of the most immersive scenes in a video game and then say, Jonas, that wasn't the AAA audio, that was me by myself, I did that. That's so impressive. And I think that does so much for like building up confidence that, you know, you need to build up that confidence, and you need people to kind of invest themselves in what you do. Now, what I'll quickly do is just, if you're watching in the audience, by the way, and you've got any questions, like we're reaching like sort of the last 20 minutes, like of what the stream could be, because we'll finish up at 2:00. So if you've got any questions based on what you're hearing, please do ask them in the YouTube chat. We will happily sit and kind of bring them out and read them out and talk about them. But then I suppose otherwise, like, so you've talked a lot about kind of scale of projects as well, you know, sort of indie and AAA. But one thing I'd love to do is, we're trying to sort of help people try and get their first role in the games industry. And we talked a little bit about building portfolio. And I had this idea in my head that a really good way of playing around with different genres might be like to do game jams in different genres. And I just don't know if you two have much experience when it comes to like, have you participated in game jams? Have you seen game jams be like a meaningful way for people to build up authentic and kind of like quite convincing portfolios of work, especially because it's experimental, it's fast, so you can go from one weekend doing a fantasy game, and the next weekend you can do a horror game, and the next weekend you can do like a a sci-fi visual novel or something. Is there anything in that? Am I crazy?
No, it is a great way of getting a portfolio. I recommend it to sort of mentees quite a lot. If I would give more specific advice about game jams, try and go for one that you can invest a little bit more time in. So if you're just doing something over a weekend, you might get something for a portfolio, but the time you actually get to invest to explore, if it's a new genre to you, if you're doing fantasy, I've never done fantasy before. Oh, I've never made magic before, and then you're suddenly having to learn everything within 2 days and get it working in a game. It can be not detrimental, but you know what I mean. You won't get your best work, which you would maybe want to share in a portfolio, versus having one that's done over a week that you can chip away at, where you can really invest or allow yourself time to get things wrong. There, like, there isn't really a wrong way you can approach sound, but you might put things in game and realize that this fireball you made is a really cool sound, but it doesn't work for this context or this type of fireball, or how the player animation now is because it's changed. So, you know, you always want your showreel to be somewhat polished and presentable to show this is your best work, or this is work that you're happy sharing, you know, as a badge of honor. So short game jams can be really great as a way to explore new genres, but if you can get like a middle length one that you actually get to invest time in, that's amazing. At least from a sound effects side. You might have a different opinion, Thomas.
Well, firstly, hello, Helen. Saw you in the chat. I was going to say is, for me, game jams has been a bit of a mixed bag. I tend to find that I feel like this somehow defeats the point of them a little bit. I sometimes found that I got more out of it with people I knew, when for me, a lot of the time doing game jams with people I didn't know was kind of the point. But that's because a lot of the times when I did do game jams, when I was there as like a music designer and a composer, I tended to actually not get my work in the game by the end, just because of technical reasons or running out of time, or things changed as we were going. But as with people I know, we tended to like discuss it slightly beforehand, so I had sort of a game plan, kind of, before going in. But saying that, there was nothing about even the game jams where my music didn't get into the end, just because everything kind of fell apart slightly, and which is totally fine to happen, by the way. The end result of a game jam is that you've done a game jam. That actually is the best result. It doesn't necessarily, I think, matter if your game didn't quite come to fruition. And the fact that you learned like a heck of an awful lot about the pipeline, about how to talk to your ideas, about to other people, and how to listen, really genuinely listen to their ideas, and just try and create a sympathetic and empathetic atmosphere, so no one's afraid to say what they think about something, even if it's about a discipline that they don't actually know anything about. If you just feel something isn't quite correct, just say it. It's fine, as long as you deliver it in a sympathetic and empathetic way. It's totally fine. For me, those are actually the best lessons of game jams. It's just really how to how to interact and talk with people. It's good for networking, and you will actually, if it does go well, you might end up with some really cool music that you're really happy with, or you learn something new. But I have found sometimes as a composer, you just slightly because sometimes you're viewed as the end of a pipeline, even though that's not actually true. You really should be there, like toward probably the start. But that can sometimes happen because of circumstances completely out of other people's control. It just happens sometimes, but still very valuable, I would say.
Yeah, audio is still very much an uphill battle to be involved from the start.
Yeah.
Companies are getting better at it, and places that tend to hire leads and direction in-house, kind of, that's our job, is to push it and just make sure we're involved along the entire process. But it is inevitable that sound is always the last part of a process, and sometimes we get stuck in ways because of that, whether things are already like defined of how they should maybe behave in game technically, so you have to just work with what you can to make the audio work in a way that is suitable, or just, hey, we've already made the flow of this scene, you need to make music to fit it, as opposed to combining it and working with music to tell the story and the flow of the scene and sound effects.
Yeah.
I just on that sort of topic, I just came from watching an interview with Mark Brown, who just did Mind Over Magnet. He runs the YouTube channel GMTK, and part of that conversation was literally about game feel and how important it is for sound to be there really early on, to give that sense of, does this game feel work? Does it all come together? Does it have that polish? And just this one developer basically saying, I need sound to be there from the earliest prototype, otherwise I don't believe in it. I don't know where it's going.
Oh, that's music to my ears.
Yeah. I thought you might appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now, in the meantime, we do have some really wonderful audience questions, so thank you so much to everyone who is asking questions. We're going to go through them one by one, and I'll bring them up on screen as well to sort of moderate. So, Sir Shinra, now, thankfully, I was going to ask this question in a slightly different way, I think, no matter what, which is because I wanted to talk about the idea of polish in audio as well. So, Sir Shinra's question, do you, or do any of you, get to a point where you know you can add more and increase the quality, however it might be tight for time? Do you have to compromise or cut corners, etc.? How do you deal with it? And I think basically, yeah, I wanted to basically sort of flavor that as like, yeah, this idea between time constraints and what you have to deliver, and if you have more time, what does that look like in terms of, or how does that sound like in terms of polish? Yeah, so answer the question however you will.
Well, I'll go one. I'll leave my head before I say this, and I think you'll like this, Ryan. It's I do an awful lot of mixing music as well, because I just really enjoy mixing music. I think it's fun. I remember spending a lot of time trying to perfect things, and then a mixing engineer who's got way more experience than me said, "Thomas, you never finish a mix. You just learn when to stop." And to be honest, with games, I feel that's, or any artistic endeavor, I think that's probably true. I mean, I could still be polishing the first game I ever worked on today, and if I allowed myself. So I think I don't like that. I'm not quite sure. I feel cutting corners is although that does happen. I think compromise is probably the more accurate way to describe that, because sometimes you'd be like, okay, we've got a week left because contracts were signed. And there's no moving this deadline because there's too many moving parts. They've got this one scene I really want to do, but there's one scene over here that probably more important and that I should probably maybe fix. And so yeah, you do decide to weigh up which is the most bang for buck here, basically. Sometimes deadlines are pretty tight, sometimes not so much, but I'm not sure if I can recall a corner cut necessarily, but obviously that does happen. Yeah, totally. I think compromise is probably, that's probably the best way to describe it. I think that was bang on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to approach mine, I guess, more from a production side of standpoint, is something that you will get wrong at the very beginning of your career and probably through most of your career, but learning to set expectations and figure out if something is unrealistic is the hardest part of anything, really. Sometimes, like, everyone hates time estimates, and when you have to do tracking and track everything on Jira in hourly or day things, it's awful. But yeah, so a lot of the time, at least in games, we work with milestones or sprints. So it's often a case of defining what you want to deliver for that. Like, just because you're putting in a sound, it doesn't have to be the final version of that sound. If you're early on in a game and there's a big deadline, and you're doing, guns, let's say, you don't need the full implementation of that gun. You maybe just need it to play a sound that sounds like it's coming from a shotgun because that's what it is. And then the next milestone, you can polish it and say, oh, it's a shotgun, but it's being fired outside, and it changes if it's fired inside as well. And you can build the layers of kind of complexity within that. If it's a case of you coming to the end of a project, then that is a lot more difficult. It is a case of what is the kind of the priority. I always try and focus on I call it like player focus sounds. It's something that the player is going to hear the most. If it's a, it is a gun, you're going to hear that all the time. If it's a UI sound that every time you level up, if you hear that 100 times in a game, if it isn't very good quality, it will annoy you very quickly. So it's a case of just prioritizing what the most important sound is, or what the most important piece of music is, or functionality for music. Yeah, that's probably how I'd say it. If you're going into a stealth game and every time you crouch and go into stealth mode, the music is just not right, it would very quickly take you out of that feeling. So, focusing on that to sell the gameplay experience is a really maybe more important than focusing on the music for a jukebox in the corner of a room that isn't as important.
But you're totally married to, you're totally married to that sound, and you can't help yourself, and you want it to be really, really super cool, but you've got more important things to do, so you should forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that is the difficult thing, is it's defining expectations, or when you're in a studio and there is maybe more responsibility on you, or you're a smaller team, like letting the team know what you can deliver that is kind of within that, whether it's a compromise, or I'll get the ambience in, but it won't be final, but it means I have time to finish off the player jump sounds. And then they're like, oh, cool, this is really good then. That's acceptable for us. Very important.
Nice. Thanks very much for the questions, Shinra, and thank you, Ryan and Thomas, for your answers. I've got George Pack on the list next, who asks, so this might be more of a sound design question, but I'm sure there's a musical element somewhere here, which is, what kind of impact does genre have on the mix? So, for example, footsteps will be much louder in a tactical first-person shooter versus an open-world RPG, for example. So if there's any sort of examples where you can extrapolate this to music or soundtrack as well, like maybe instruments having more of a definitive sort of presence, by all means, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll quickly jump in first, I guess, with the sound effects. Obviously, you've pretty much hit the nail on the head with at least the footsteps. The weapons are another similar one where, if you're in a third-person shooter, you always want to hear your weapon sound a little louder than everyone else's, because that is more of the immersion, but you wouldn't have it as loud as Call of Duty, let's say, because of the third-person nature, it's just as important to hear everything else going on within the screen. You're not sort of inside the camera in the same way you would as a first person. So genres like that can have a massive difference. A lot of it is, like, as I've mentioned many times, just what should the player, or what does the player need to feel or understand in this context? And that will always, if you can ask yourself that question, it will always help you define the mix. Like, no matter what it is, like if you're playing a little sim like Planet Coaster, if you look on those kind of projects where there's giant things on screen that look like they should make a sound, then you would have to make something that lets them make a sound, and the little sort of smaller creatures on the screen probably aren't as important, just because you're zoomed out really far. So there's a lot of kind of interactive context that just should make sense to a player to understand. And I'll let you cover the musical side.
Before I do that, you're actually reminded me of one of my favorite examples of this whole zooming in and zooming out, which is in Civilization. Like you zoom in on like a lake and you'll sort of hear the rippling water, or you'll like zoom in on a resource and you'll hear sort of like the sound of that, or you zoom in on the mountains, you hear the wind blowing and stuff. I mean, that's 50% of making the map feel alive, at least, I would say. But then again, that number, problematic when I say it, because I'm biased. I think as far as the mix goes, I think this is like probably super genre specific. Like if I was in an RPG, like an open world, quite a lot of the music that like in those kinds of games is actually pretty straightforward. It's not it's usually just a playlist of tracks that goes down with sort of minimal amounts of variation. But the thing is, the music is so good I actually don't think you really need to do more than that. And I think it's in that context, it's actually okay to hear pieces that you like Horizon Zero Dawn. Oh, the soundtrack was great. And when I was playing as Aloy, exploring the land, I actually didn't mind that I heard tracks that were a bit familiar because they were so evocative and so interesting and so well composed. I don't really think it mattered. It's one of the see in most middleware programs, you can do something called random tracks where stems start playing randomly. I've kind of almost stopped doing that as a in my career. I almost don't use random tracks at all anymore, basically because none of my favorite music is random. None of it. I usually use something called sequence tracks. They usually work like a playlist. They'll go like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I have a lot more control, and I can do something with a sense of musicality. And because it was games like Horizon or any other open world game that made me realize, wow, as long as the music is good, you don't need to resort to any sort of random at all. You can actually just be really confident with your music and allow it to breathe in a way that feels natural. So when it comes, I guess, sorry, that's a bit away from the point. But when it comes to the mix, when it comes to music, you have to have a happy marriage between the other audio disciplines. Like, for example, say you're in like an action scene and like you're in like a burning building that's all crumbling and like falling down. There's usually a lot of low end in those kinds of situations, like boulders smashing to the ground and things like that. And a lot of the times in games I've worked on, if you just actually listen to the music soloed, it's almost no low end in it at all, because the audio spectrum is a very greedy place, especially in the low end. You have to basically pick something that's going to win. There's nothing can really have an amazingly happy relationship the lower down the audio spectrum you go. And if you are putting like massive brass or something down on the bottom, while a lot of like SD, really cool SD, is thumping really hard, it's just going to make things sound very muddy for not really terribly much gain. It's all super, super context dependent, and you really need to be talking to everyone else in the audio team and coming to an agreement on what you think leads that scene. Very similar to what we spoke about earlier. It's again, you need a happy marriage between the audio and everything else in the game, but you also need to work on your sort of the audio marriage within your team to try and make sure you're leading things properly. Because a bit like when you're writing music, if you're writing a track, most of your mixing should actually probably be done at like an instrumentation level. Like you wouldn't put two bass guitars over each other playing the exact same notes unless you were doing something kind of specific. Probably not. It's pretty much the same for mixing games, at least from my point of view. Is in a sense you're picking your instruments, but that may be sound design, it may be SFX and dialogue. Very few circumstances, dialogue has not been the most important thing you have to hear. So if I wouldn't put like a vocal track on something where that was important, but that's just instrumentation and orchestration. It just apply that to your fellow teammates, basically.
Nice. Thank you for expanding on that. At the very end there, I was just catching dialogue isn't important. And the budding voice actor inside died. But no, I completely understand what you were saying. And thank you for expanding on that. I'm realizing the time. So what I'm going to do is we've had 2 questions in chat for a while now. So I'm going to throw them out, but I'm going to sort of say that if you're worried about time, yeah, because you guys might need to run off at 2:00 as well, and I want to respect that. So I'm going to throw these questions at you, yeah, we'll get through them nice and quick. Will Source Audio Works asks, is it advisable to have vastly different genres in your composing portfolio? I've heard that you should find a sound and stick to it, but that doesn't sound very interesting long term. So this might be a Thomas question more than anything else, but I'm sure you both have something to say. So by all means.
I mean, for me, I've sort of settled on a couple of different things. Like I really love synths, so a lot of my music recently has been very sort of cyberpunky synth based. I think as long as you can apply your sound to a genre, I think that's fine. Like I remember I was talking to a composer who was originally a percussionist, and they were talking about how they wrote for orchestra, and they were like, "Oh yeah, the violins, that feels like a hi hat to me, like and like the like double basses, that feels like my kick drum." So they weren't really. By the way, that's fine. You don't need to be some. You don't need to be some sort of spat out by some sort of London conservatoire, you know, to feel like you have some sort of weird sort of class-based qualification to write orchestral music. It really doesn't matter. Just try and put down what you feel is right, and then the genre really doesn't necessarily matter. Though I would say maybe earlier on in your career, dipping your toe in some genres that maybe you weren't necessarily comfortable with, just to make you seem like you have a wider palette. But I have kind of noticed as you age as a composer, you do tend to get typecasted maybe a bit more and more and more, and that might end up being something you're a bit surprised by. Like I'll speak about Jason Graves is known for doing horror, but like he's actually like I hope it doesn't mind me saying, actually quite like a lovely whimsical chap. You know, it's just like his personality. It's quite odd because his personality is more like games he's done, like the VR game Moss, which is a very quirky and very emotional score. Excellent score. I highly encourage everyone to listen to it. It is the opposite of Dead Space, like the total opposite. But you see, hope it doesn't mind me saying, as a person, I feel that's actually a much better reflection of him, as of his personality. It's funny where it takes you, but I would say maybe be slightly broader earlier on in your career, but don't try and be a pro at absolutely everything. I certainly don't. There's certain genres of music I don't really touch. Not because I'm not necessarily interested in them, but because I decided to invest in certain places where gigs have taken me. And again, over time, you do find yourself getting slightly typecast, but as long as you're okay with that, then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, at least from a hiring perspective, very on in your kind of career, there's two approaches of like be broad to show, like if you're looking for more indie devs that you can do a bit of everything because you never know who you're going to talk to or what projects you might work on. I mean, my sound design in general has been across many different styles and genres of project that just I've been very lucky and fortunate to get. But having sort of examples that you can show people will get you a really good foot in the door earlier on. But I do think it is quite important to develop a sound or a style that you enjoy, for the most part, something that you actually want to keep at because we do our job because we love it. Once you kind of established already in the industry, it is a really great sort of, way just to keep yourself going, I'd say.
Nice. Thank you both for expanding on that one. And then I'm just going to jump straight into the last question. It's a bit specific. It's actually it kind of comes in two parts. So Bruno Tesaro, it comes in two comments, really. Amazing talk, guys. I have a question about level design. I see a lot of people talking about how lighting and visual elements are important to guide the player and all. But I think audio is as important, if not more important. In your experience, do you think audio is well implemented in that way? Or is there a better way that we could be using audio for something as important as level design? So really just the relationship, I suppose, between guiding the player, giving the player information that's usually visual. Can audio do that? And I think the answer is yes, but maybe how, or maybe some examples. And then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, so in general, audio as a discipline, we are designers. People might argue with that, but we are. So audio signposting is probably how I would define that, is something that I've done in a lot of projects, and I try and approach where I can of guiding the player. It's easy to do with sort of a really high level would be ambient cues. So if you're guiding someone down an alleyway or a series of alleyways through a maze, and maybe just using light sounds as an example, you can have it so that the broken LED sounds are the wrong way, and the more sort of typical buzzing sounds you would expect are the right way. Signposting can be really important just for sort of user experience, making the paths of interest more sonically interesting. So, maybe there's some fake conversation going on in the street, or maybe if you're walking down the alleyway, you hear rats in that direction that are doing something. So you're like, oh, I'm looking in this direction now. Let's go this way because something is happening here. It's a really important feature, but audio can also betray you in the same way that if you're walking through a maze and looking at all the lights that are on, and you walk down an alleyway that has a light on, you'd think this is the right path. But if the alleyway's a dead end, you no longer trust that design language. So a lot of your sort of storytelling is trying to communicate a way that is very consistent throughout the entirety of your project. So it is something that you have to think of from the very start. In the same way that we know if a red barrel in any project is something that's going to explode, and then you shoot a red barrel and it doesn't explode, you're like, oh, I don't know what to think anymore. So it's that same application for audio. And it is something that we definitely, everyone could be better at. I think just games as a whole really haven't explored this as much as we can.
It sounds all very similar to the use of musical themes for me. And by the way, you don't need to use sort of classic Hollywood themes, in order to do things. You can do textures and things like that. I don't like the idea of thinking you need to be married to like something that sounds like John Williams all the time. Like, not necessarily, not at all. I wouldn't want to pigeonhole that. But musical themes are a very good way for like using them early on in the game. If it's a character theme, and you probably use it maybe a bit more strongly than you would for that character, and then you pepper it throughout the game at specific points, just to sort of drive an association or a certain feeling. Like maybe the melody ends on like a satisfying major chord, but in a one particular scene, you want to give a sense of something being unfinished. So you do the first bit of the theme, but then you get to the chord just before the end and you don't use it, so everything feels like very unfinished. But that isn't really necessarily anything to do with games at all. That's just like, to get back to what I said originally, that's just to do with people telling stories that we obsessively do. Again, I don't want to say you need to get locked into using classical themes. You don't need to. You can do a completely wild like Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima style score where it just sounds like an orchestra screaming at you. You can do that too. It's totally fine.
Amazing stuff. I think there's plenty there for people to chew on and to think about when they want to sort of implement into their own game worlds, whether it's your signposting, whether it's your mixing, whether or not its dialogue is important to you or not. I say with tears in my eyes. No, I think we've really kind of covered a huge amount of ground there. Thank you so much, you two, for sitting with us and talking about different genres and talking about your experiences, whether it be your implementation of music, your implementation of sound, designing, production within those kind of projects, etc. Now, before we sort of wrap up, really, I just both want to give you both a moment as well, just to sort of say, is there anything that you personally want to sort of shout out, maybe where people can find you, or obviously you can't talk about future projects, but how could people keep an eye on such projects? Were they to be announced, or were you to want to put the word out, where could people do that? Ryan, you go first.
Well, I'm quite antisocial, to be honest, so I'm not the best at keeping up with all this. LinkedIn, everyone's welcome to add me, just Ryan Sim. I'm also on Blue Sky, just as Ryan Sim, all one word. So they're probably the most common ones. I'm also on Twitter as Ryan Sim. They're my only real social media. So it's mostly strongman posts. So just things of me in the gym, but that's what you get.
And then you, Thomas.
I've got LinkedIn. It's Thomas.Hansen. I'll just double check. What is it? It's Thomas.Hansen. Oh yeah, Thomas Hansen on LinkedIn. Find me there and please add me. I love talking about this kind of thing. I'm a bit like Ryan. I don't post as much as I should, but I'm trying to change. I'm trying to change that. But also today, I just started a Blue Sky account, and that's at Thomas Hansen Music. So I'm slowly sort of greasing that up to get that to move a little bit. But I promise I will post there about stuff.
I'll give you a follow just as we wrap up the stream.
That's very kind,
because I can't help myself. I think that kind of brings us to the end of this talk. Thank you very much, both for again sitting down with me and talking about audio, and for just delivering some much needed knowledge out there into the world to people that might really have questions about these things, or just found that despite all their self-learning and self-teaching, they just found that maybe this particular topic of genre in music and audio just isn't being tackled enough. Hopefully we've helped some people out there. If you're watching this live in the current timeline, then please know that this is not the last stream that we'll be doing this week at Into Games. We'll be doing a stream tomorrow at the same time, 1 p.m. start, with narrative designer Kim McCaskill, and we're going to be talking quite actually specifically about comedy and horror. So I suppose it's still that theme of genres really, but we're going to be talking about sort of writing for comedy and horror in games, but also just in media in general. So a huge amount to learn from there, and yeah, looking forward to hearing from Kim on that one. And then that brings us to the end of the year. So if you want to keep in touch with what Into Games are up to, again, there's a link somewhere in the YouTube description. Keep an eye out, join the Discord. We'll be going on a holiday break, but then we come back in 2025, and there'll be all sorts going on. I have the utmost confidence. That's more or less it, I think, from us today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Ryan and Thomas, again, for giving us your time. You've both been absolutely wonderful and fantastic, and it's just been a real joy kind of just being able to be the fly on the wall to your conversations about these subjects. It's a lot of fun hearing two people who care about what they care about be able to share that in a conversation. So thank you once again for doing that. Bye-bye for now, everyone. We'll play you out with a quick trailer of Into Games' Slow Game Club, and then we're offline. So that's all from us. Bye-bye. Do the wave.